it was a big win. We know that Nick Saban didn't quite feel the same as he typically does with these games against the lesser opponents. We've, often find that Nick Saban prefers going up against opponents where it ends up being a closer game. Oh my gosh, we won by a field goal. When the competition isn't what it's supposed to be, he gets really, really perturbed throughout the week and in games. So with that being said, coming off a 48-14 win, Saban's like, where's the focus? Where's the focus? So he sounds off this week. Just kind of want to get your take on the mood within the Alabama Crimson Tide locker room and, of course, media room throughout the week and, of course, post-game.
Yeah, I think it almost played into what he was saying all of last week once he came out with that fiery Wednesday night press conference, and he kind of continued Thursday night talking about how they almost forget about what it is like to lose. And that's sort of the point where we're at now. I mean, this is 16 straight games that they've won. They haven't lost since the 2019 Iron Bowl. That's the third longest streak of the Saban era that they've compiled now. And so there's a decent amount of players in this team that either don't remember losing a game at Alabama because they haven't been here long enough, or B, it's been so long and maybe they didn't play that much that year where it's just not ingrained in their brain. So that's, I think, where Saban's trying to get is maybe let's use this Mercer game as an example. If you don't prepare the right way throughout the week, then you're going to get burned, even by an FCS team like Mercer. And obviously it's all relative, and they weren't in danger of losing this game at all. But I think relative to what we expected out of them, which was coming out and scoring touchdowns on four, five, six of your first drives, I think that's not what happened. And that's sort of what knocked them back a little bit. And again, I think that sort of plays into Saban's point, which is when you play Florida, when you play Texas A&M, when you play Ole Miss, when you play Auburn, LSU, like, you need to prepare the right way. And they weren't in danger of losing this game, but they could almost use this game as an example to take games more seriously and take the week of preparation more seriously going forward.
Yeah, and one thing I find that Nick Saban is so good at, and I've noticed this trend, over the years of covering him, is that a lot of times when he does sound off at the media, or a media member has a question and maybe he doesn't like the question, but in reality it's oftentimes the messaging that he knows he wants to get to his players. He wants his players to hear about it. He wants them to know about it. And he wants to make sure all of us on the outside, that rat poison, are well aware of the message he's trying to get across. And so I think obviously that being the case in this week. And so we kind of start with the offensive side of the football. Obviously the score not indicative of any major glaring issues, especially from an offensive standpoint when you put 48 points on the board. But there were some early struggles that, of course, Nick Saban not happy about. They go 3 and out on the first series. Then on the second drive, they have the holding penalty. Bryce Young ended up not being able to convert on that when he tried to hit Williams on the sideline on that 3rd and 15. So, when you think about, I guess, week one offense versus a Miami team that obviously comes in with a lot more, talent and elite playmaking ability versus this Mercer team. And yet we kind of land on this. What are we going to pick apart about this offense? In your opinion, what did you see?
Yeah, I don't know if there, like you said, I don't think there was a major glaring issue. I think it was sort of a group of smaller issues that piled up and became a problem for him early in the game. I mean, like you said, the penalty, and also the penalty against Jamison Williams for his helmet coming off and then taking a swing or shove, no matter, however you want to put it, against that Mercer defender. Right. That was dumb. And that's obviously probably at the top of his list of penalties that he's going to rip into them about this week. But also just the running game. I mean, there was a couple runs in there. I think there's 3 in the first half that went for less than 3 yards, which you weren't expecting that against Mercer's front. You would expect Evan Neal and Emil Ekiyor and these guys who are going to be NFL players before long, dominating a defensive line like Mercer. And that happened at some points in the first half, but not at every point. And then the receivers, it's still a little bit of work in progress there. And that's probably the position that got corrected, I think, in our minds the most from week one. Just with Jamison Williams' stat line, I think it was 3 catches on 7 targets, had that drop in there. John Mechie, I think, had a pretty good game, but the production is just not quite at the level of like a Devontae Smith, where he's just putting up these gaudy numbers. And I'm not sure it ever will be with Mechie. I think he's probably a notch below kind of what we saw out of the last, the big group of receivers to come through lately, but still a very good player. And then Slade Bolden's one too, where I would have expected more out of this offense, just having watched Bill O'Brien before. Like he loves to use that slot guy as an outlet for Bryce Young. You're on 3rd and long, and he's getting pressure, as we saw with the offensive line. Chris Owens giving up that pressure, and then you can kind of dump it off to a guy like Slade Bolden and get some yards after the catch. He had 1 catch yesterday. It was a touchdown, but just not really being used quite as much as I would expect. And they seem to like JoJo Earl a little bit more and moving him into that role because he's more explosive. So maybe over the course of the season, they're able to get the ball more into Earl's hands. Maybe Jameson Williams bounces back from this game. Maybe Mechie takes a step forward. But overall, the wide receiver position, I think, is not quite what we thought it was coming out of last week.
Yeah, and kind of expounding upon that, just based on what you saw from Bryce Young. So he's the guy obviously delivering the mail, right? What did you see? I guess week 1, I know the poise was there, and that's what's, so I guess prolific about Bryce Young, a young quarterback and his ability to kind of just make plays even when he's off balance. And, he just stays calm and he's just got that demeanor about him. And so in week 1, I think we saw a lot of that. What was your take on things in week 2? Again, not a lot of pressure coming from that Mercer team, but just a lot of those mistakes and penalties that I know, while not necessarily all his fault, he's inheriting some of that. What did you gather from just the way he sort of handled things on the field as the game manager?
I thought it was still pretty good. I mean, there weren't any glaring mistakes or decisions that I thought were risky on his part. I thought there was, he had that long pass to Jameson Williams down the right sideline. They got called back on a penalty. Threw 3 touchdown passes. I think he actually had a really good day. Again, the numbers aren't what we expected them to come in, aren't what we expected of them coming into the game, but I just don't know if he was totally the problem. I think the offensive line, that pressure he felt from the right side there with Chris Owens starting at right tackle, that was an issue. And the running game was, again, up and down around him. So I'll stick with what Saban said a few weeks ago. They need to play well around Bryce Young, and I just didn't feel like they did it as much in this game. I'd be interested to see what happens at right tackle if they consider making a change from Chris Owens, who just seems a little bit out of position there. I know he's probably better on the interior as a center or guard. Do they put in Kendall Randolph, who's coming off an injury? Do they put in Damian George, who's coming off an injury? Do they eventually feel comfortable putting in J.C. Latham, the freshman there? I just don't know if we'll be seeing Chris Owens starting the entire season, especially if he's giving up a play like he did early in the game there, which to his credit, he took blame for after the game.
Yeah, and I think going along with that, when you head into a game like they're up against going to Gainesville and what is going to be a tremendously wild environment, things are certainly going to look and feel quite a bit different for them. So obviously cleaning up the penalties is going to be huge. I think there was a total of 13 penalties, 6 of those for Alabama in the first half, 70 yards in the first half alone, 6 of those on the Crimson Tide. And I think that's obviously what kind of contributed to that slow start, and obviously some of that miscommunication and some of those glaring issues. And obviously, again, the score not indicative of that, but as we move into SEC play, certainly going to need to clean things up. So I imagine Saban got the message across loud and clear. But all is not bad in the world for the Alabama Crimson Tide, who obviously hung 48 on Mercer. There are some great things to point out from this football game as well. And let's talk about some of the freshmen, including Kool-Aid McKinstry, who really had an impressive first start.
Right, exactly. A little bit of a surprise there coming into the game, where we're all watching warm-ups and there's no Josh Jobe and there's no Jalen Armour-Davis, which, as I think I mentioned on here before, we can't watch practice this year. We watched the first couple practices of fall camp, and then the COVID situation changed. So we're not really there during the week to see at practice that Jobe's not practicing or Armour-Davis is not practicing. So we don't really know to ask Nick Saban that, and he never kind of divulges it on his own. So it was a little bit of a surprise. Right. And, I'm sure there's some strategy involved there, but they line up with Kool-Aid McKinstry and Marcus Banks both making their first starts, and they both have interceptions. And the McKinstry play, I think he got helped out a little bit by a tip at the line from Drew Sanders, but another young guy, he's going to be playing a lot for him this year with Chris Allen out. So those seem to be the 2 freshmen, Kool-Aid and then JoJo Earl going back to the offense, that seem to have gotten a lot more playing time a lot more opportunities than some of their peers. And, maybe a guy like Dallas Turner could get some more chances too, with Will Anderson potentially out at outside linebacker. But they really seem to like Earl, and they really seem to like Kool-Aid. Again, is Kool-Aid going to be starting next week or this week at Florida? I don't think so. I think it sounds like Armour Davis should be back and Job should be back. But over the course of the season, that is somewhere where I could foresee them making a change and maybe putting in Kool-Aid once they feel comfortable enough with him in a full-time starting role.
All right, good stuff. Of course, Alabama opening line for this game. I guess they opened as a 15-point favorite. That's since dropped to 13.5 against Florida. That on the road. They'll be playing in Gainesville, 2:30 on CBS. Looking forward to that one, 1 versus 11. So obviously, the Crimson Tide will certainly be tested. But I do think coming out of a game like this, we always see that Alabama, kind of has a strong response. After a week like this, when things are obviously not as perfect as, Nick Saban would hope they would be. And, certainly they're going to be going into a pretty wild environment in the swamp. Will you be making the trip down there, Mike?
I will. It's my first time, and the first time Alabama's been down there in 10 years, since 2011. Yep. So
that's
something where I think SEC fans would like to see more of these games compared to, playing in Atlanta or playing.
Oh yeah, I know. Week 3 of the season, not a bad place to be. Certainly excited about it. And, I actually covered that game in 2011 when I first moved to Alabama. So that was my first experience in Gainesville, and one of my first college football experiences on this level. So I definitely, I kind of went through the ringer there, because I did the Penn State game with Alabama, and then of course Gainesville that year too. So, that was a pretty interesting and obviously fun year as a first year of my coverage of Alabama football here in the state of Alabama, coming from Virginia. So good stuff. Mike, we appreciate the insight as always. Thank you guys for watching. Enjoy week 3 of the college football season. We'll check back with you. And of course, you can get all our updates on AL.com, as well as on all of our social media channels.